Welcome, everyone. I am really excited about today's show because we have Eileen Hawley with us, and there's going to be something for everyone on today's coffee. Eileen has done a number of different things, a really interesting life. She was communications director and press secretary for former Governor Sam Brownback. She has worked for the Lawrence Chamber, creating a vision and strategic marketing plan for them. She worked for NASA and actually was part of the communications team following the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003. She was actually the voice of mission control for more than 40 space shuttle and space station missions. And one of the interesting things that I think she has done is she has shown whippets. And we'll get into that. It's a dog that, and if I say this wrong, Eileen, you can get on me later, but they look like a little greyhound, I think. But I think that's another interesting aspect of your life. So Eileen Hawley, it is also your birthday today. So happy birthday. Yay.
Thank you.
So Eileen, thank you for joining us on your birthday. Again, just really a remarkable life, and you continue to do some really interesting things, which we'd also like to talk about later. But can you kind of just tell us your story? Because I know there's been some personal tragedy and some obstacles that you had to overcome to do all those really incredible things you've done. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. You know, and when you hear kind of the NASA thing and working for the governor, it's like, wow, that's awesome. I will guarantee if you talk to people who knew me in high school or knew me in my early 20s, they would say, how on earth was that lazy girl going to do anything? And part of my problem was I was just too smart for my own darn good. Thought I knew everything. But for me, I was a first generation college student in my family. My parents had no expectation that my sister or I would go to college. Maybe you go to the junior college, but you know, it was, you know, go to school, get married, raise babies. That would be, for my mother, that was the vision of what a good life would be. And our high school was the newest high school in town. So for the most part, the student body there was like me. And we had the lowest percentage rate of students who went on to college. And I don't remember ever a counselor talking to me about going to school, going to college, what did I want to do? And then just as I was getting ready to graduate from high school, 3 weeks before I graduated from high school, my older sister was killed in a car accident. And I just lost interest. I mean, for about 2 years, I just didn't care. I didn't care about much of anything. So, you know, I look back on that time and I think, okay, I had some pretty good reasons for not going to school. Shortly after that, my father had a heart attack and he owned his own print shop. So I ended up running the print shop for him when I was 17 years old, which was fun. You know, I had a good time, but it all built into this, I don't have time to go to school. And it just wasn't a priority for me to go to school. And by the time I decided it was a priority for me, that I really wanted to get my education, I was living on my own. I was a secretary, so I wasn't making a ton of money, working full time. And so the best I could do was maybe take a class or two. So it took me 21 years after I graduated from high school to get my bachelor's degree, which I finally did, graduating summa cum laude from the University of Houston, because I had moved down to Texas by that time. And so it was a scenic route to get my degree. I don't regret it because I'm content with who I am, and any other path would have resulted in a different version of me. But I know that there are people, and I'm friends with some friends from high school still, and every so often they say something and I can tell what they're really doing is going, dang, how'd you do that? Because I really wasn't known. I was undisciplined. I wasn't patient. It took me a lot of getting slapped a couple of times to realize that I needed to manage myself better and figure out what my priorities were. And then from there, go on and do the best I could to finish school.
So you may have said this, or maybe I'm remembering it. Did you grow up in California? Is that?
Yeah, I've been everywhere. I was born in New York. We
Okay.
moved to California when I started school in California. So I was a kid
Okay.
there, grew up in California, met the man I subsequently married who happened to be in Houston. And so eventually we got married. I moved to Houston and then we came back to Kansas. So here I am and here I hope to remain.
Yes. And we hope that too. When you went to Houston, can you tell us how you got to NASA? When I was young, in my early 20s, that was a dream of mine to work for NASA. I was a space geek. I loved it. Grew up with the Apollo program, really. Maybe the tail end of Gemini, but um, just loved it. I applied at NASA and, got the letter that said, we really don't need anybody with your skill set, which was none. But how did you get to NASA? Because that's a really big deal. And you said you were a secretary, you got your degree over 21 years. Can you fill in some of the blanks between
Sure.
that?
Yeah, and I actually worked at Nissan Motors headquarters in California, which at the time was still Datsun. So that's how long ago that was. And I ended up not really being happy there and was looking for something else to do. And a friend of my mother's got me an interview at Hughes Aircraft in California. So I went to work at Hughes Aircraft, working on a satellite program. Again, there I was basically the secretary to the program manager there. Cleverly, he knew not many people liked him, and he figured out they did like me. And so I got some promotions out of that because I needed a little more authority so that I could go off and do things and get them done for him. So I did that, and it turns out that's how I met my husband, because the program I was working on had a satellite on it. And for those of you who don't know, my husband, Steve, native Kansan, is a shuttle astronaut, flew 5 times. His first flight had a Hughes aircraft payload on it, and the crew had come out to visit at Hughes and do a visit there. And I met him, and he and I began a friendship. We were like pen pals back in the day, because you didn't have email and Twitter and text back then. And so, he and I eventually got married, and I moved down to Houston. And now I'm kind of thinking, oh God, now I got to get a job. What am I going to do? So he sets me up to go talk to someone in HR. And of course, because I'm a girl, they test me to be a secretary. And I'm kind of sitting there going, well, harumph, I'm in college, I'm finishing my degree. It's a degree in media studies. And I thought, well, I don't want to be a secretary. I've already done this. It doesn't hurt to be married to Steve. And so one of the people who was in the public affairs office, which is the communications office there, said, yeah, why don't you come over and talk to me? And so since I was still in college at 33 years old, they hired me as an intern, and it just became this joke. I was the oldest living intern at the Johnson Space Center. And, there was a part of me, because if you know the civil service salary range, this is a GS7, which is about as low as it gets. And I'm kind of going, harumph. I used to make more than that as a secretary. And then I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, and somebody just opened a door for me. And I've got to be an idiot if I don't walk through that door. So I started in the public affairs office as an intern, and I worked on the media side most of the time. We had media and public outreach sides, and I ended up doing well there. And it was, I would have people occasionally say, well, you only got this job because of your husband. And the answer is, yeah, that's right. It's not why I'm still here. It's not why I'm being promoted. That was all me. And even though I use his last name, there were times he and I would be somewhere together, and you'd look at someone and they'd say, oh God, I never put the two of you together before now. And I took that as a huge compliment that people were accepting me, for the quality of work I could do. And so I was there for 18 years in Houston. I was fortunate enough to be the voice of mission control and work a bunch of missions and do a lot of fun stuff along with some not so fun stuff while I was there. When I left in 2008, I was director of the organization that I came into as an intern. So, I would look at that and say, I wasn't the best person as a commentator in mission control. I wasn't necessarily the best person in a variety of disciplines, but I was a pretty good darn package altogether. And I wanted to lead, and I was willing to work budget, and I was willing to go work those other things that are not so much fun for people, and really enjoyed it. I mean, I was fortunate to get in the door, and I was very fortunate to be able to stay there as long as I did and work with some of these legends of the space program, that I can still call friend. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
You mentioned you started literally at the ground floor as an intern and then worked your way up to become director. And this was a large team. Uh, I don't remember if it was this team was over 100 people, perhaps, or what?
Yeah, we had, I would say close to 100 civil servants. And then we had probably 2 to 3 times that of contractors who worked for us. We had a decent sized budget that kept getting smaller. As you all know that challenge. But yeah, it was a pretty large organization. And remember that NASA, the headquarters for NASA is in Washington, D.C. I'm one of a number of field centers down in Houston. And the Johnson Space Center we had a bit of an ego problem. We consider ourselves the center of the universe. I mean, we had the astronauts. It doesn't get cooler than that. So, we could be difficult to deal with as a center. And we had a center director who supported that attitude of superiority. So a lot of it for me that I learned in that job was the difference from what headquarters would want and what I wanted to do. And some of that was because here I am at an operational field center. We are flying missions every day. We're training astronauts every day. We are out dealing with the public every day. Well, they're living in a fishbowl up in Washington, D.C. with people who control the purse strings watching them very, very closely. And so their priorities are often different than what I think my priorities ought to be. And it's that developing that skill set of saying, okay, I get it. I understand why we're having a disagreement about this, but we need to talk about what's our mission. What are we supposed to be doing? And how do I do it without causing the people up at NASA headquarters a problem?
What are a couple of, you had mentioned earlier that one of the bosses you worked for, he enjoyed having you there because people liked you and you could get along with people. What are a couple of other either pieces of advice or traits that you think are especially important for a leader of a large organization? And then on the flip side of that, what are some pieces of advice you can give our students on how to be a really good team member? Because you were in both of those roles.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things I learned is just treat everyone decently. And we used to laugh when I was in Houston at the Johnson Space Center. It's like, be careful because the person who works for you today is very likely to be your boss tomorrow. And, that's not why you should be a decent human being just because you should be a decent human being. Treat people with respect, don't lie. And you really do kind of have to listen to folks and care for them. And so I think for me, part of it was learning how to delegate. My mother would have told you, I don't accept help well, and it's still a problem I have. I mean, I can be a bit of a control freak. And so for me, one of the biggest lessons I had to learn was I needed to trust people. I needed to trust that they knew how to do their jobs. And my job would be making sure that they could do their jobs. So you have to be willing to let go of some things as you move along, because there are things I really like doing that are fun and I could continue doing them, but I would be less effective as a leader if I did that. So, you need to have awareness. You need to be able to evaluate who you are. And not everybody gets this chance, but you've probably done this 100 times too, Chuck. There's all these 180, 360, 540 feedback exercises where people fill out forms about you. And you can always pick, who fills out that form about you. Well, I intentionally would pick some people that I know didn't think I did a good job, or I knew that personally had an issue with me. Because if I only go to the people I know love me, I'm not going to learn anything. And generally I did well on those. But sometimes it forces you to confront, wow, do I really do that? I mean, I used to have people tell me they were so intimidated when they first met me. And I thought, good heavens, why? I mean, I feel like I'm one of the least intimidating people I know, but that clearly wasn't the image I was giving to people. And for me, it was probably a protective thing. I was shielding myself and coming across as something that I didn't think I was. And so you need to be very self-aware and listen to how you may be perceived by other people. And when we did these feedback evaluations, the thing I would always score incredibly low on was failure to, or ability to share your heart with others. And I would say, and I don't care. I mean, for me, it was a conscious choice. I knew people wanted maybe to get more inside my head. And I thought, no, I don't want it to. There's certain things that have happened in my life I'm not going to share with you. And that should be okay. You should be able to protect those parts of your life that are special to you. And so I think that's one of the things we have to learn as leaders is, what's the part of you that you protect at all costs? And does that conflict with what you want to do as a leader? If it does, that's going to be a problem. But I think as long as we're honest with ourselves and we give people a chance, I used to tell people, and I used to tell students when I taught briefly at KU, I will trust you right up until the moment that you give me reason not to. And if we get to that point, we're done. And people would kind of look at me like, well, that's not fair. And I thought, well, then don't lie to me. I mean, just do what you're supposed to do. Be honest. Own up to a mistake if you make a mistake. And then when you make a mistake, figure out, okay, why did I? In my past, where I've made, bad judgments, it's been because I was rushing in some way. I was hurrying to get something done. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And so I have to learn that when if I feel really under pressure, I need to step back and just say, just don't do anything right now because it may not be the right thing. You can't allow that to keep you from taking action. But I know my weakness is if I'm just done dealing with something, I'm liable to just make a decision that's not the smartest thing I've ever done. But let people know if you're interested in more opportunities where you're working or what you're doing, and don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's the one thing I see a lot is people feel asking for help is a sign of weakness. I don't think I ever wrote anything for anybody, whether it was a speech or a press release, where I didn't ask somebody else to read it for me, because I know what I'm trying to say. And I will miss it if I haven't put something in a document or if I've said it wrong. And so getting fresh eyes on something and being willing to accept somebody else's feedback and to see it for what it is, honest feedback as opposed to criticism or, oh, you're wrong, I think becomes a really important part of being effective as a leader for your people. And it gives them validation that you care about their opinions as well.
And as a team member, the same advice would apply. Treat others well, like you want to be treated. Were there any other things that
You're really low, Chuck? I can't hear you.
As a leader, those are great pieces of advice. And I assume you would say, as a team member, ask questions, which you just did say, and then also treat people well. Were there any other things that you did when you started as an intern that helped you work your way up as director, or was it just good work, treating others well, and asking questions when you needed to? Because those are all three pretty good things.
Yeah, I think the latter, which was asking questions if I didn't understand something, or more properly, wanting to learn from other people. So when we worked a shuttle mission, the newsroom would be staffed with 8 or 9 or 10 public affairs officers. We typically just called ourselves PAOs, and we'd be getting phone calls from media from around the world. And when I first started working there, I'd sit there and I'd kind of watch the more senior people answer questions. And I finally asked one of them, I said, hey, Kyle, can I just pick up the extension and listen to your interview? Because all I'm hearing is your answers, and I don't know the questions they're asking you. So he said, yeah, go ahead. So, he would let me listen to the whole interview, which was really important for me, because then I'd hear the question the reporter's asking and then hear the answer Kyle would give. And it's like, okay, he is being responsive, but he's answering the question he wants to answer. And I was amazed at how well informed he was about stuff. And I had to remind myself, yeah, you've been working here for 6 months. He's been here for 10 years. But if there's people out there who have the skill, not everybody can teach. I'm a decent, not a good teacher. But if there's someone in your organization who has that skill to teach, to mentor, ask them if they'll do that for you. Ask them if they'll help you learn. And so I learned a lot by listening and watching what other people did when I was training to become a commentator in mission control. You worked, the way we did it is you sat there and you observed for a while. You were kind of the extra person on console, and you listened and you maybe took notes, and then you watched how did this other commentator, because our job as commentators was merely to pass along information, to translate some of the NASA language into something you or I would understand. And so I learned where the reference books were. It's like, oh, hey, they don't know all this. They're actually looking some of it up. That's cool. And you learn how to build relationships and how to manage in these organizations, because you're in a room full of people, all of whom are trying to do their job, and you can't be disruptive to that job. And so then, after a while they'd say, hey, we need to give a status update on mission control. Why don't you do it, Eileen? Why don't you do this for your first time? I'm like, but you do it the first time and you get through it, and you realize it's probably, you hope to God that's not the best you're ever going to be. But you just take it in steps and do it. Let people know you're interested in advancement. And I think just be willing to learn from the people out there who have something to offer. And after you listen to them, you may say, no, that doesn't work for me. And that's okay, because you now know a path that doesn't work for you, but you've learned something in the process.
You touched on this just briefly. This Saturday, weather permitting, SpaceX and NASA will be launching Crew Dragon, second manned, I guess, fully operational, first fully operational manned mission since the shuttle from U.S. soil with a U.S. contractor. I don't know if I'm getting all of that right, but when you were working and you were the voice of mission control, what would a week be like for you as you were in those final days preparing for launch? And of course there were scrubs and things like that, but what was that like, as just part of your job? And then was it different when Steve was on the shuttle? I mean, did you have to do the same job and then also be spouse?
Yeah, so the way it worked on a typical shuttle mission, and actually I'm seeing a lot of the similarities with the upcoming Dragon mission. There's already been one test flight that was flown using Dragon. This is the first, quote, operational flight for Crew 1. And so in the shuttle days, the crew would go down to Florida 3 days ahead of time. It allows them to stay in quarantine. It allows, sorry, my dog just wandered by. It allows them to do some final checks of their spacecraft. They still do what we call TCDT, a terminal countdown demonstration test. And the Dragon crew did that yesterday, where you climb on board and you act like you're going to launch and you stop just short of launch. And it's another check. So all of that really takes place down in Florida. So for those of us in Houston, although one of us from Houston would always be in Florida for a launch because the crew belonged to us. And so if there was an abort of a launch where they aborted to go to any of the transatlantic landing sites, if we went down to work a launch, we took our passports because we were going to be part of the people who jumped on a plane to go to wherever the shuttle had landed to go get the crew and deal with things there. So a lot of it takes place in Florida. In Houston, we're just waiting for the most part until launch day. I will tell you that the quietest place in the world to be on launch day was inside mission control. Everybody's just focused on their work. They're looking at their computers, they're watching data. And I had a TV screen, but I typically didn't look at it during launch. I just looked at data. And the only way you would know that we had launched is the booster officer sitting in the back would say, flight booster ignition confirmed. That was it. And it was that quiet. So for me, it was a peaceful place to be. But from the moment the solid rocket boosters lit, Houston owned that mission, because once those solid boosters light, you're going somewhere. Hey, dog, come here. So I have a cat on the outside of the door and the dog on the inside, and they'd like to play. But so we would work the totality of the mission. Hey, Oslo. And it would be, we would staff 24 hours a day in mission control. So we worked in shifts. The newsroom, depending on the mission, would staff 24 hours or not. But our production crew, so it wasn't just us. We had a whole back room. We had TV producers. We had audio technicians. You had a bunch of folks who were working for the mission, and most of us were working 24/7. Our joke used to be, if there's a holiday, NASA will find a way to work over it. I mean, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you name it, we were probably working. But you didn't really care because it was such a neat place to be. And so I really, really enjoyed the opportunity to do that. And it was, as a public affairs officer and as a commentator, challenging. Much of it was what I enjoyed about working for Governor Brownback, is it's a very challenging environment to work in, and you have to be on your game and you have to do a good job. And I don't want to be bored in a job. I want a job that challenges me almost every day that I walk in. So, we would work all those. And then when the mission was over, the crew would come home to Houston, either that day or the next day, depending on what time they landed. And we would have a public welcome home ceremony for the crew that the public could come out to out at Ellington Air Force Base. And then we could go home and sleep after that. As a spouse, it was different. It was very different. I did not work missions where Steve was flying. So NASA has, since the days of Challenger, had a plan in place for the families. And so the families would go down to Florida right ahead of the crew going down there. There was always an astronaut or two assigned basically to babysit the family. We had casualty assistance officers assigned to us in the event that we had what NASA would call a bad day. And so when I would go back to Houston, if I went to work, I stayed in my office. I didn't go out into the main bullpen area where the media were, because I actually did have a reporter once who said, "Hey, your hometown newspaper is willing to do, a story about you. You just have to let me interview you." And I said, my hometown newspaper is the LA Times. I really don't think they care. And I said, when they pay me, I'll talk to you, but they're not paying me to talk to you as a spouse. So no. And so Steve and I tried to keep a big distance between who we were, who we are, and what we do. And the only time someone caught me off guard after we lost Columbia was I was doing an interview shortly after we lost the crew. And the last question the reporter asks me is, "Well, Eileen, your husband's an astronaut. This could have been him. How do you feel?" And I literally took a step backward. I mean, I just felt like he had struck me, because it came out of the blue, because when I'm working, I don't think of myself as an astronaut spouse. I think of myself as a NASA spokesperson. And so that was a little bit surprising, but you have to choose what you want to be. And some days you work and some days you're a spouse, and you try to keep those as separate as you can.
You mentioned Columbia. You have taught classes on crisis communications. I know that's one of the reasons Governor Brownback hired you. Obviously that was a huge crisis. Can you kind of take us through that, and what did you learn from a communication standpoint? I'm sure you were already prepared for it, but how did the training before the event impact how you carried out your work, and what did you learn from it from a crisis communication standpoint?
Sure. I mean, I could talk all day about crisis communication because I love it. It's one of my favorite topics. In this case, and bear in mind, we'd lost, Challenger in 1986. So I wasn't working at NASA at the time, but I had a friend on that flight. The payload specialist from Hughes Aircraft was a good friend of mine, Greg Jarvis. And so for a lot of people, when we lost Columbia, you're kind of looking at one another saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe we're here again." And so there were a lot of lessons that came forward and a lot of actions we took during Columbia based on how badly we did during Challenger. And most of y'all are way too young to remember Challenger very well. But there was a complete lockdown of information. The agency wouldn't even confirm what the temperatures were at the time of launch. They just wouldn't talk. So the end result was NASA lost control of its message. Every talking head in the world was out there speculating about things. And it was a bit of a disaster. So when we lost Columbia, which again, happened live on TV, everybody saw this, everybody knew what had happened. I'm sitting in Houston. There were three of us working in the newsroom that morning. And I called our events person and I said, we're about to get slammed with media help. And she said, okay. And I never thought about it again because she was so incredibly talented. I knew that she would take care of everything. And we went from 0 media in Houston to more than 1,500 media in 24 hours. And international media as well. So, you sort of had to look and say, okay, what are all of the things we have to do? I never had to call a single member of my team. They all just showed up at work. The challenge was making them go home because we had to go into 24-hour operations. It's like, go home. I need you to come back later. People from other centers came. They just showed up and they said, we're here to help. Tell us what you want us to do. So the thing I learned again in the category of I don't accept help well was I really needed help. And so I looked at it and I grabbed a couple of guys and I said, I need you to go work with the White House because President Bush was coming to do a memorial service. You guys go deal with the White House because I can't. And, a couple of other people, it's like, I need you guys to go off and help the families and you guys need to deal with the media. And so we had kind of groups that we worked out of trying to manage all of this. The biggest thing was, coordinating with headquarters again, of course, because the political reality of what's happened. We had the first Israeli astronaut on board. It didn't last long, but for a little while there, people thought, oh my God, it was probably sabotage. It's like, no, it's doing, 10,000 miles an hour. It probably wasn't shot down. But we had to deal with the reality of headquarters and how do you manage things? And we did have a communications plan, a contingency plan in place. And this time it was followed. And Sean O'Keefe was our administrator at the time. And he's not one of my favorite people, but I will give him credit for being a tremendous leader in that moment. And he just came out and he said, we aren't going to hide anything. We're going to talk about everything that happened up until the moment of the accident. After that, we will not speculate. And he put in place an independent review board. So as soon as they got set up, our job was supportive to them. They became the people who talked about it. We stayed open 24/7 for a while until reporters walked in one day and said, are you guys going home for the weekend? And I said, no, not planning on it. Why? And they said, because if you don't close, we can't go home and we want to go home. And I said, okay, well, if you want us to, sure, we'll close. And it was intentional on our part because what I did not want to see was, well, there was no one from NASA was available to comment. It's like, no, I'm not going to get caught in that one. So there was a lot to do. We had people out in the piney woods of Texas, Louisiana area, which is kind of nasty piney woods. It was cold, it was raining, it was January, February. And we had people, going out searching for the crew. So what helped us, and I think helps all the time, and it's important for people to keep in mind, is know what you want to say. What are your messages? And your messages have to be real, not trite, not sound bites. So all of our messages were driven from 3 things. Find the crew and bring them home. Find the problem and fix it. Fly again safely. That was it. And you just worked your messages around that. And we got a lot of freedom of information requests from reporters wanting information about the crew. And this is where I would say building relationships is important. Oslo, come on. Because I had worked hard to have relationships with the lawyers at the Johnson Space Center because I didn't want the first time I walked in the door to be, because there was a problem, they were going to say, who are you? Go away. So I knew them pretty well. And I walked into the chief counsel's office and I said, I need you to look at some of these Freedom of Information Act requests that we're getting. And I need to know, what do we do with some of these? And he looked at them and he said, here's the deal. Some of this information is releasable. It would devastate the families. And he said, let them take us to court. And so there was a conscious decision made on, we'll release as much as we can. And in fact, we put up a website where we released all this, and the reporters hated it because everyone thinks their request is the only one we're getting on a particular topic. And suddenly the information's out there for any reporter to get. But we made a conscious decision that we were going to protect information about the crew and families. And the lawyer said, it's not illegal for us to deny it. So let's deny it and let's let them take us to court. And by the time they do, no one will care anymore. And they were right, but it was helped by the fact that over time I had worked hard to build relationships with them. I had worked hard for them to trust me. Because sometimes lawyers, and you know this, Chuck, lawyers and communications people often want to do different things. What I want the governor to say about something, a lawyer may look and say, no, that is a really bad idea, don't do that. So if you have a relationship with those kind of counselors in your organization, those kind of people, build trust with them. I mean, that's another one. I mean, it's one of the other reasons I succeeded is I worked at building trust with people and they knew I would respect it. And I think, that really helped. So there was probably no community better prepared for or more affected by the shuttle astronauts than NASA in Houston. And one of the things I really learned was how important it was for us to engage with the community, because the community was in pain. We knew these people. We knew every single one of them. Their children went to school with other people's children. They went and ate in local restaurants. So it's a weird little community. As an aside, when I first moved down to Texas, my best friend came to visit, and a friend had called and said, hey, can I borrow your lawnmower? And I said, yeah, sure. So she's out there helping me load the lawnmower. And she says, so this just like happens all the time, right? And I said, what? And she goes, oh, I don't know. The sixth guy to walk on the moon just stopped by and borrowed your lawnmower. And I was like, oh, yeah, sorry. And it's not that I didn't appreciate the sixth guy who walked on the moon as a friend, but yeah, we all lived together. We were all friends. In fact, his wife and I used to show whippets together. But we were really, really affected by it, and the community was. And so it became important for us to figure out, how do you let the community heal as well? And I mean, every restaurant was bringing food for the people who were having to work. It was sort of like the attacks in Oklahoma. We had this memorial of stuffed teddy bears and all sorts of other things that sprang up. How do you deal with that in a respectful way? So it was, you had to kind of let the community be part of that process. And that was a step I could easily have missed. And fortunately, we had other people paying attention to it and saying, this is what we need to do to help our community as well.
We have a question from our field, Kindley High School in Coffeyville. I wanted to know, I'm paraphrasing, how can someone, especially someone in a small community like Coffeyville, work for NASA? And I know there are a lot of different opportunities with NASA, but what's your best piece of advice?
Yeah, and it can happen. I mean, my husband was born in Ottawa. He was raised in Salina. Joe Engel's from Topeka, or from Abilene. Yeah, Chapman. So it can happen. It depends what you want to do. NASA has a ton of programs oriented at students. So if you're a student, and I'll have to see if I can find the specific website, Chuck, and send it to you, but there are lots of opportunities for students to engage with NASA and start to build that relationship with them while they're younger, so that when they do want to apply for a job, you're a reasonably known quantity. People see that you've actually shown some interest before. But NASA's always looking for a variety of skills. I mean, engineers, yes, astronauts, yes, public affairs people, but HR people, finance people. I mean, there's a huge number of things that you can do at the agency. And I don't think you should feel limited by where you're from. I think the challenge, if you're in a smaller town, is knowing that those opportunities exist. So I'll try and get Chuck that link so you can look at some of the things that are available to students that maybe help you find out if this is really where your passion is, and get people to know who you are.
That would be great. Thank you. So you moved on from NASA, ultimately got to Lawrence, and you were working for the Lawrence Area Chamber of Commerce when you were hired to be communications director for then Governor Sam Brownback. A big change, I would think, professionally. Although you had been around politics, dealing with NASA headquarters, certainly, and just that. What was that like, making the transition from what you had known before to a world of politics and dealing with media that may not always have been as supportive of your bosses? Maybe they were in the past with NASA, and maybe not. I mean, what was that like? What was that transition like, and the change in the responsibilities?
That was really different. and a lot of it for me was, you know, when I was at Houston, if a reporter came and said, hey, I want to do an interview about something, I was like, great, let me find you the subject matter expert. We'll have that person talk to you. I show up in the governor's office and guess what? I'm the subject matter expert. So, it was a lot more forward facing than I was used to in terms of having to be the face of the Brownback administration. And that was a big change for me. I'm a very introverted person who happened to land in a somewhat extroverted career. So I don't like being on camera. It's just not one of the things I do. But that was the biggest thing for me, was just how much, you had to be the face for the lieutenant governor. I had to be the face for the governor's office. It was a lot more forward facing. The media, and I have dealt with media in my entire career, were far more hostile and antagonistic than any group of reporters I had ever dealt with. So part of what I wanted to do was sort of build some trust with them and build a relationship with them. And I think I had at least moderate success doing that. I don't need them to be my friend. I just don't need to create an adversarial relationship, because our jobs are going to bring us into conflict anyway. It was, for me, I thought, very challenging. And one of the things I most respected about the governor was when he interviewed me, he said, look, no two people are going to agree on everything. And he said, so, what do we do? And it was one of those times where if I thought about it, I probably wouldn't have said this, but it apparently worked. I just said, Governor, I'm a woman who grew up in Southern California in the 70s. Let me assure you there are things that you and I do not agree on. And he said, fair enough. How do we deal with that? And I said, nobody elected me. They elected you. I think my job is to give you counsel and to tell you, how I think something is going to be played in the media, how I think the public will react to something. But the decision is yours, and you make the decision. And my job then becomes conveying to the best of my ability why you made the decision you did. And he said, okay. And he hired me. But I really respected the fact that he hired me knowing that I was not going to agree with him on everything, and that, we had policy issues. And I think, that's something we've kind of lost today, is that people they don't accept that you can have differences with people and still get along. It wasn't my job to put my political beliefs out there. My job was to support Governor Brownback. And I hope that I did that to the best of my ability. But it was a very different environment. I spent a career at NASA being completely apolitical. And that was our job. We could not take sides. And so we kind of treated whoever was in office at that time, we dealt with them. Tom DeLay was our congressman for a long time. And I can't tell you the number of times I got a phone call on a Sunday evening saying, hey, Tom DeLay wants to come give a talk at NASA at 9:00 Monday morning. It's like, okay, I can do that. But that was kind of the extent of the politics that we had to deal with. And we were frankly protected by federal law, right? I can't use my official capacity to endorse somebody as a candidate. I can't use my official capacity to better myself in some way. So there were things you could say no to because you were protected. But after a career spent not being political, to suddenly be seen as political was mentally quite an adjustment for me, to deal with that. But I tell you, I learned more about this state, traveling the state with Sam Brownback, and learned how much he loves this state. And I'd come home and I talked to my husband about it, and he goes, I was born here and I didn't know that. It's like, I know, you need to travel with the man. He's like an encyclopedia.
You mentioned relationships again, and trying to build trust and relationships with the media. What were some of the, I don't know, maybe basic things, but what were some of the things you tried to do when you came in? Because it did feel like there was a little bit of, or a lot of bit of an adversarial relationship between the governor's office and the media when you started. So what were some of the things you tried to do to chip away at that relationship or lack of relationship, and what was effective and what maybe wasn't, if you care to share?
Yeah, no, there were one or two reporters who I think you were never going to move. They could not keep their personal feelings out of what they did. And I tried as best as I could to be fair with them, but when you have somebody who just cannot remove their personal feelings from it, if you're wasting your time trying to move them. But I did go down and just, walk down to the area where all the reporters were. And I would just take my cup of tea with me and go sit down and talk to them and, kind of introduce myself and see if I could understand from them what were the issues that they were having. And that seemed to help a little bit. I had, if you remember, Chuck, I had this bubble gum ball machine in my office that was full of peanut M&Ms. It was the classic reporter trap, because they would come in and just sit there and start eating peanut M&Ms, and they would talk to me. And the benefit of that was, they had a tendency, they would write their weekend story. And so around 3:00 on Friday, they'd come in and they'd say, hey, writing a weekend story about whatever this topic is, and I need to quote at 3:00 on a Friday. And they do that intentionally so you don't have time to respond. Well, they'd come in and talk to me, and on Wednesday afternoon, I'd kind of know what their weekend story was going to be. And so I could walk over and talk to the chief of staff or walk over and talk to the policy director and say, I don't know exactly where this story's going, but this is the general topic they're after. So we would have time to think through, okay, what might they ask? What is it we want to say? So that when they showed up at Friday at 3, I could go, oh yeah, hang on, get you something in a minute. And I think that was really helpful. And I think Governor Brownback wanted a better relationship with the reporters. And so he did a couple of things. A couple times we grabbed a cup of coffee and walked down and just visited with them. And the reporters loved it. It turned out to be dangerous because the governor would relax a little bit too much. And I kept trying to tell him, look, you're on the record here. So it's nice that we go down, and it is a little bit more casual. And it does have a benefit because we're building a relationship with these guys. So maybe they'll be a little more fair. And then, we'd occasionally just send them a note that said, hey, governor's got donuts in the conference room, come on up. And we'd get, 4 or 5 of the guys would come up and sit there and have a donut, or they'd sit there for a long time. And the governor would finally say, you can eat those. But it was the same as going down for coffee and trying to build a relationship with them, except in the conference room, the governor stayed more formal. And that was important to do. So we would go and meet with the editors of some of the papers when we were out. We would make an appointment to just go talk to them, not to be accusatory, not to badmouth any reporter, but just to chat and say, what's the priorities of your media outlet, and how do we work with you? And that, I think, it's a long lead item before you see any kind of improved relationship from that. But I do think that the governor got some credit from those people for being willing to just walk into their office and sit down and talk to them, and to try to make him, on a personal level, he's an incredibly approachable human being, but he wasn't perceived that way. So I think it helped to show people this very human side of a governor.
So taking a different path now, you showed Whippets, and that's
Yes.
about the extent of my knowledge of what you did, except you've done it for a long time. And they look like, to me, little miniature greyhounds. And apparently Oslo is with you somewhere in the room.
Yes.
Tell us about that. How did you get interested in showing dogs, and specifically Whippets? And I'm going to put one on the screen for those who don't know.
You're going to try and find one? Oh, yeah, there you go. That's what they look like. I started showing dogs when I was 14. I babysat for someone who had dogs. And so one time when I was babysitting, I took the kids to the dog show with them, and I came home and badgered my parents incessantly. And we'd always had pets. We always had dogs. And so we went to a show, and my first show dog was an Irish setter. And I had Irish setters for a couple of years, and I had an English setter. And as we would go to dog shows, we were making friends with different people, and we had friends who had Whippets. And my mother thought, oh, that'd be fun. I could get a Whippet because I could show it, because you don't have to run with them. And I'm looking at her going, have you been watching the people in the ring? Because yeah, you do have to run with them. So we got our first Whippet decades ago. And I probably for the last 40 years, that's the breed that I've had. We have 2 currently, but I showed them, and I apprenticed with a professional dog handler for a while, which convinced me that was definitely not the career path I wanted to follow. And dog shows are fun. They bring out the competitive instinct that I have, because nobody shows up to lose. I mean, we all want to win. But you build some friendships along the way. And for me, it was when I was younger and going to dog shows, it was a different world. Like anything, it's a microcosm of society at large. So it was really my first exposure at 16, 17, 18 to people who looked and thought and behaved differently than I did. And it was in an environment that I liked, so I didn't feel threatened by any of that. And so it was really an interesting place to be and spend your time. And we used to travel all the time to go to shows and kind of hang out with the dogs. But yeah, it's I'm very fortunate to have had the chance to do that, and I really enjoy them, except when Oslo misbehaves like he has this morning.
Was there a highlight or two of your career showing whippets?
Sure. So I mean, if you've watched like the Westminster Kennel Club, you kind of understand the groups and best in show. And so when you start showing a dog, you show them in the classes. And so these are dogs that are not champions yet, and they're broken up by gender and they're broken up by age. So this is 1985. And the only reason I remember it is my husband stumbled over this videotape that was taken in April of 1985, and he digitized it for me a couple of weeks ago. And I was showing my class female dog, and she went best of breed. And it's like, oh my God, my dog went best of breed. This is so cool. So I take her in the hound group. Oh my God, my class bitch just won the hound group. And it was like, so, and Getty was a lovely dog. And you saw in the picture of the whippet, their ears kind of go like this. They go off kind of to the side. Hers kind of went like this. She just had radar for ears. And so I had trained her not to use her ears in the ring because they were really ugly. So she wins the group, and they're taking pictures, and the judge is there, and the photographers are there, and a photographer throws a toy to get her to react and show her ears. They just go straight up in the air. And the poor judge is like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. She puts her hand on the dog's head, and then she takes her hand off the dog's ears, go back up. And I just thought, oh, sorry. But it was great. It was just, my mom and I bred whippets for several years. And we had her male, Damien, we called him, was top 10 in the country at the time, with us doing limited showing. So he was that once in a lifetime dog that you get. And it is really a lot of fun. I haven't shown that much because I really don't want to travel much anymore. Dog shows are just now beginning to start up again because of COVID, with lots of restrictions in place. And really, you can't just go watch a dog show anymore, which is unfortunate. But I have friends I made at dog shows when I was 17 years old that I'm still friends with today. So, it is one of those things that helped me to build some lasting relationships with people.
Great. Eileen, just in a couple minutes we have left, what are you doing now? I know you're maybe doing some consulting work. What's keeping you busy professionally now?
It's pretty quiet right now just because of COVID. I'm a senior consultant with the Griffin Communications Group out of Houston. In our small little incestuous NASA world, Gwen Griffin owns that company along with a man named Jeff Carr. Jeff's father was Jerry Carr, who was a Skylab astronaut. Gwen's father is Jerry Griffin, who was an Apollo flight director. So we all know one another. We're kind of all in that bubble. But I do some work with Gwen, and it's what I love about it is I'm back being able to support aerospace and space again. I was doing some work with the Conrad Challenge through her organization. And so, we're trying to find ways to continue to do those kinds of things in a virtual environment where these students, particularly with the Conrad Challenge, can't travel to have people see the things that they've designed. So it's a little bit challenging doing that, and really just trying to care for an aging parent, which is, it's good that we can. We're glad that we have the ability to do that, but you have to be careful these days. And so we just stay busy doing that and taking care of ourselves. I'm going to head out and go for a walk a bit later.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful birthday.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending an hour of it with Jag K.
Yeah,
Eileen, is Oslo?
Here's
Hey,
Oslo. There he is. Okay.
He's
Happy
a
now,
good-looking
dog.
guy. All right, Eileen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. It's good to see you.
Here, have a great day.
All right. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy your coffee.